Hi, I'm Jasper, and welcome to Aliens Love Earth, the platform where we heal the Earth with art. Today, I'm having a talk with Lilly Schwartz, also known artistically as Polarcoaster, an experimental musician, field recordist, photographer, artist, what not really, whose work feels like stumbling into a dream you forgot you once had. Now, she just released her new album, Dreams Long Forgotten, which is a haunting and intimate project built from rediscovered tape recordings she originally recorded years ago, before the pandemic. Lilly says these tapes felt like they were made by someone else entirely, and the result is a deeply emotional album about memory, transformation, and collaborating with your past self. Now, I'm really excited for our talk with Lilly today, but before we dive in, I'd love to invite you to heal the Earth with us, for free. Yeah, really. It's as simple as hitting that subscribe or follow button wherever you're listening or watching, and we will help restore 1 square meter of ecosystem where it's needed the most in your name. It's only 1 or 2 clicks, it's completely free for you, and you're genuinely healing the Earth that way. Now, thank you so much for that. Now let's dive into our talk. Please welcome Lilly Schwartz, also known as Polarcoaster. Hi Lilly, so good that you're here. Yeah, really excited for our chat. How are you feeling?
I'm great. I'm really looking forward to this. And yeah, thanks for
Nice.
having me.
Yeah, makes 2 of us. Yeah, I'm really excited. As I briefly said, like before we hit record already, I think your new album really fits super well with like the Aliens of Earth project and what we're trying to, share here. So I'm really, really curious for that. I also feel you're doing a lot creatively. And therefore I would like, as a first question, like to ask, how would you actually describe the things you do creatively yourself?
Well, I really do a lot of different things. um, I lately I've had this issue of what do I say if people ask me what I do? And I used to just say I'm a photographer, but I think it has become less true now because I'm so much more into music now. But yeah, and I definitely don't think I'm a YouTuber, so that's always such a bad word somehow.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I do a lot of different things and it all feeds into each other. So it's all kind of connected. And I guess I'm a creative person.
Yeah.
There's
I guess
really,
you can say that.
there's really no good word for it anymore because I do too many things.
Yeah. I mean, I also like that. But why would you frame yourself in a box? Well, actually,
Exactly.
I am wondering about that, but I got a question about that later, about fitting in a box. But first, let me take it back like a little bit, because you said I would never call myself a musician before, but now you have 3 albums. So I don't think you can avoid that anymore. How did that Polarcoaster music alias or project actually begin? Did that evolve out of your photography, or was it something else that sparked that?
That's actually quite interesting because I mean, I used to make music when I was younger, when I was
Mm.
20 or something like that. I used to make music, even though I never told anyone about it, pretty much. I never showed it to anyone because I was kind of afraid that my friends wouldn't think that I was cool anymore if they didn't like my music. Mm, so I was quite insecure back then about my music. But when I started my YouTube channel, I needed background music for the videos. And so I started making my own again and it kind of spiraled from there. Then people started asking for albums in the comments section, and
Oh,
I
really?
also made I made this really random video about modding my guitar, and that kind of took off, and a lot of guitar players were watching that, and I ended up with a music audience somehow, which was completely unintentional. And yeah, they were asking for albums, so I ended up putting albums out, and
That's so cool.
now I spend most of my time with it, actually.
It's cool how that can organically like evolve basically in its own thing then. Did people just started asking for you to release tracks based on the background music, or were you already evolving a bit more in the direction of sharing how you were making it and things like that as well?
I really only had 2 music-related videos when people were starting to ask for albums. One was building a DIY guitar pedal, and the other
Yeah.
was modding my guitar. And the rest were still all photography videos, but I got a lot of comments like, oh, the music is the best thing about this, which, makes me wonder about my photography sometimes.
Did that hurt your feelings in the first time you saw it?
No, not really, because I thought it was, from a musician's perspective, that was quite interesting. I mean, I never really thought that I would end up having so many people watch my videos just for my music. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. It
Yeah,
sounds
kind of
very
flattering
cool.
too.
Yeah. I can just imagine if you start a channel with the idea of photography or art or other things, and then all of a sudden hearing that something else completely is like the best thing about it. It's quite an interesting twist then. Yeah.
It's so random anyway. I started this channel as like with drawing videos, like completely different. I was already doing a lot of photography for like 10 years or more. 10 years or something like that. And then I ended up, I ended up making photography videos because I had already an audience like from my photo blog, and they were watching mostly photography stuff, and they ended up connecting more with photography videos. So I ended up doing photography videos in the end because people were actually watching them, and drawing videos is so easy to make that there is just far too much competition in that respect.
Yeah. I saw the things about the bears coming by and things like that.
Yeah, and I think YouTube does that to you, that you end up somewhere where you didn't really expect to go. Like the music thing was never planned, and I also didn't really plan to make videos about photography, even though it kind of made more sense than making drawing videos.
Yeah, that's funny. How do you feel it influences your music that you have this visual background going into like a sonic art form? Do you also think in images first when you create the sound then, or is that completely different if you're working on music?
I'm a very visual person in general, so I have like head cinema going, I guess. I think about sound in a very cinematic way, in a sense, I think. And I mean, I made background music, so it was kind of half scoring anyway. There was always a visual aspect to it. And I also think about the album art a lot while I'm making it. It all connects, definitely.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, and if you then take it like to this album a bit more specific, like Dreams Long Forgotten, you randomly found this pile of old tapes in 24 abandoned laying on the attic or so, but they became the foundation for your like new album. How did that happen? Can you take us back to the moment you found these recordings that formed the
The
foundation for this album?
recordings, I think I actually have them here.
Really?
This was my old SD card. Wait, does that zoom? No, it doesn't zoom
sharp? Oh yeah, there it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's 16 gigabytes, so it's an old SD card. And I found that with all sorts of recordings, and yeah, it was really strange to listen to them, like properly weird, because they were from before the pandemic, and it felt so disconnected. Like I'm not the same person anymore who took those recordings. I mean, I perfectly remember how it felt to make these recordings, and I feel like I'm not even remotely the same person anymore. So that really was the idea, that really sparked the whole project, because I wanted to do something with those recordings just because they felt so disconnected from me. It's like when you get sounds from another artist or something like that, and it's like it's not your own, but you're riffing off it. And I felt like I was collaborating with myself from the past in a way.
That's so cool. Yeah. Did you like know what was on this SD card when you found the SD card, or did you just found it and were like, what's on here? Let's put it in, and then you were like really surprised by what's on there?
I had no idea what was on there.
Yeah.
I found all these old recordings and I had completely forgotten about some of them.
Yeah.
Like random stuff that I recorded in an Airbnb 6 years ago or something like that. Didn't even remember that I ended up recording the fridge there. I mean, that's totally random anyway. And yes, that recording is actually on the album, The Fridge.
Yeah,
Yes.
but you don't recognize it anymore, probably.
It sounds like wind, so.
Yeah. And what track can people hear the refrigerator or the fridge back if they listen to the album?
I think it's on Amber Waves Under a Slow Sky. Yes, I think so.
Yeah. I think I remember the wind sounds there. Yeah. So that's the fridge. Good to know.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's the fridge. And I think some of it might be a train journey, also back from Barcelona. But I heard a lot of wind in it, and I think I pushed it more in that direction by putting LFOs on it, and yeah.
Yeah. Cool. What did you hear in the old version of yourself that made you feel like so disconnected from it? Like, was it emotional, like emotionally or nostalgically looking back, or more like surreal, or that you forgot about them? What did you feel?
I felt like that person who made those recordings was really naive. Like a younger version of myself who didn't know what would be coming and didn't see what would happen and so on. And it's to me, it seems like a cynical thing to say this in retrospect, but I feel like that after the pandemic, I just feel like I was in a more hopeful space, I suppose.
Before the pandemic, you mean?
Yes, I was in a more hopeful space. And
Yeah.
I felt like that I liked that naive outlook on life in a way, because, if you think about how people are when they're children, they're so unconstrained about how they create because they're not weighed down by all their experiences, all the bad things that might have happened to them later on in life and so on. And in a way, I feel like that about how I was creating before the pandemic in a more unrestrained way and not overthinking too much. And I had a longing to go back to that, I guess, which is one of the inspirations why I wanted to do something with, because I wanted to feel more like that again, I suppose.
Find more play again in your creation or so then?
Yeah, less trying to be in control, I suppose, too. Yeah.
Do you feel you could like achieve a bit of that by collaborating with your past self?
I think so. I definitely tried to be more spontaneous with this album, and I wasn't working with a lot of hardware. I was using mostly software, and I know Ableton Live really well, so it felt very much like the thing that I use without thinking too much about it. I just know it so well. So it felt more playful because I wasn't thinking about how I do this, and I didn't have to look at manuals or whatever, which I sometimes have to do with more complex hardware.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes me actually wonder. And well, when we just started talking, I said, yeah, why would you put yourself in a box with all the different art forms that you make? But I actually saw that for this last album, you kind of put yourself in a box and like kind of limited yourself, right? In the process by like not using all your full hardware setup, and as you just mentioned, like doing more with the software and things like that. What made you choose like for these boundaries in this case instead of complete artistic freedom and playfulness as you just touched on?
I think that complete artistic freedom sounds really good in theory, but in practice, it's usually the blank page effect, where you just stare at the blank page and don't know what to do with yourself. Or the musical equivalent is that you look at your plugin folder in Ableton and there are like 100 different plugins and you don't know where to start. And you just think, oh God, what am I going to do? And then you spend like an hour trying to select a preset and nothing comes of it in the end. So restrictions really help to make that process easier. So choosing a few instruments is easier because then you already know I only have these 5 things to choose from, so I choose this and it's all very immediate and you don't spend hours overthinking things. So I find limitations surprisingly freeing in a way.
Yeah, because you mentioned you were planning to make a whole different album actually, right? Originally.
Yeah, originally I was trying to write an album with my modular, and by now I've finished that album, so
Really?
yeah, but I was procrastinating on that album, so I ended up making this one instead. The sensible thing to do. Yeah.
just do something else extra on the side. Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Like when you're really busy, why not do something else on top? Because, yeah,
Yeah.
I do that sort of thing a lot. Too
Yeah.
much, probably. So yeah, but the modular album was really frustrating me at times because it went in like 5 different directions at once, and I didn't really know where to go with it because I had made my modular a little bit too versatile, so there weren't enough restrictions in the machine. And I just ended up with 2 albums and an EP and some tracks that don't fit anywhere and that sort of thing.
Yeah. But like, where do I go with this now then?
Yeah, kind of like this. And I didn't know where to go with it because it wasn't coming together. Sometimes you have 2 different directions and you manage to have like a track or 2 in between that can connect it. But in this case, it was just going in too many directions at once, so I couldn't really fix it. And I was wondering how to do that. And while I was thinking about it, I ended up making this album instead.
Do you feel like taking a step away from it and creating some space around that project maybe helped you to finish it after, or what do you think helped you to finish it like after this album?
I think this album was the sort of test run in a way, because I thought that the problem was probably the lack of limitations. So I intentionally tried to have more limitations with this album, and thinking that if this works for that, I can make it work for this modular album too. And that was actually exactly how it worked out in the end. So that's how I ended up finishing the other one too, because I knew how to do it in the end from this experience.
Yeah. So like setting the limitations, but then with the hardware, and then you combined what you learned. That's what you took from this album, kind of.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Yeah, there's one track on the album that like really stuck with me, not just musically, but also in terms of the narrative around it, Oceans Above. Since, I got a bit of the story from you, like it's about this deep sea creature that, seeks for the surface, fleeing for the pollution and for the deep sea drilling and mining. And basically it sees its world collapsing and therefore flees somewhere else. And yeah, I feel that that's a super strong metaphor also for how climate change and environmental destruction basically ripples far beyond what we as humans can see in our direct environment, and maybe the lack of that insight as well. Yeah, I don't know, how do you feel? What was for you, like, maybe you can take me back to like how that came together, that image after which you created the sound.
The starting point of the track was a field recording on the SD card that I found, and it was a cement mixer, actually. It was a really creaky cement mixer, and I started changing it and mangling it and slowing it down, and somehow this weird whale sound came out. Whale, I don't know. Sometimes I think it's more of a creature with tentacles, but it doesn't really know what it wants to be. But I had this deep sea feeling from it. And I felt like it was this sort of distressed sound to it, like that it was fleeing from something or something like that. And then the most obvious thing I was thinking of was all the noise pollution in the seas. I've been reading a lot about that lately. I guess noise pollution has been on my mind because in the flat where we lived before, there was a lot of construction noise. I was very sensitive to that. And I ended up reading about there's no way to get away from the human created noise anywhere. You can't even go to the bottom of the ocean to get away from it. It's still there. So, and that was sort of on my mind when I wrote this track, because that was the most obvious thing that I was thinking of.
So you heard the sound when you were just playing around with it, and then like this image kind of starts to shape. That's like a bit how it works for you then, in that case.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's like head cinema for me. I come up with some story sometimes and just roll with it, and it brings me somewhere. The bells at the end, like those chimes that come in at the end of the track, those came from this idea of coming to the surface and seeing sunlight maybe for the first time, and it reflecting on the waves of the ocean, and it felt to me like chimes. So
Do you feel when it reaches that point that that's for the creature a moment of hope or despair?
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, yeah,
I think so. Whether that's justified, I don't know.
yeah,
I mean, it's getting closer to humans, so maybe not.
yeah. And it doesn't have feet and stuff, maybe like we do. Maybe it does. I don't
Yeah.
know.
I don't.
Would be nice if it develops those.
What do we know? What is down there anyway?
Yeah, very
Who
little.
knows?
I think there's this saying, right, that humans explored more or further into space than actually on this planet in the seas, right?
Yeah, I think so because of the pressure differential. So it's
Yeah,
harder for us to go down there than into space, I
yeah,
suppose.
yeah. Very interesting. I would love to like just put Oceans Above on so that we can like listen to it together, and then yeah, maybe people listening along will also recognize both the sea creature and maybe the bells at the end, indeed, as a hopeful message. So
Yeah.
this is Oceans Above. Yes. I Yeah, it's really cool. I think that we talked about the narrative and the sounds that were in there before listening, because I feel personally that now listening to it again with the story fresh, you can really feel and see that as well. I really feel this colossal animal like going up with the sound getting lighter as well. And at some point, like one of the bells was almost in a rhythm, like one of these, how do you call that? From submarines? Like sonar? Like,
Sonar, yeah.
yeah, it almost was like peeping as well. And then I started to see that a bit. Yeah. And was that the train you mentioned all the way at the end? Like the
No,
train, tung, 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 tung. Okay, that's something
no,
else, probably.
no. All the way at the end, I reversed it and
Hmm.
put it through a delay and
That's the
through the
cement mill still.
yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. I'm yeah, I gotta say, like, we just touched on that it feels like hope a bit in the end, and it definitely feels light. As something that also grabbed my attention when I was like going through your profiles, and like when I read something about the album and about your music on your Bandcamp, for example, it says create the soundtrack of our impending doom, where this sounds at the end like quite hopeful, and you say you also feel like it might be a hopeful end for the creature. I'm just curious how those two are balancing out with each other for you.
That tagline, I actually wrote that before the pandemic, and I put that on my Bandcamp account before I put out anything. I set up my Bandcamp account and I didn't have anything on there yet. And then after the pandemic started, I put my first album out and it's all fitting somehow. So I just left it there. But I don't think that feeling actually went away so much from me. It's definitely still there, the impending doom feeling, not only because of, climate emergency and so on. I mean, that's very, very obvious. And I have my opinions about it. I mean, I don't really think that anyone in the West is going to do anything about it because they're just too focused on profit, making profit. I mean, we saw what happened during the pandemic with profit. They let a whole lot of people die for profit. And why not let half the planet die and half the animals on the planet? They don't really care. So I don't
Yeah.
really think there's much hope there that anyone in the West will sort this out. But luckily, there isn't only the West. So some people are going to do something about it, I think. They're already
Yeah.
doing it. It's just, yeah. The question is whether in the West, how they're going to react to it. And also, of course, everything that's happening with wars right now and the technology that they're using in those wars make me not very hopeful for the future.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask because I think it was in the video about how your album came together. You have quite a extensive video on your YouTube for people that want to check that out. There you go a bit more in depth about the techniques you used and stuff as well. I'll link that below as well. Where you also mentioned that during the pandemic you kind of lost quite some faith in humanity, also for the reasons you mentioned, that as someone with how do you say, like a vulnerability for getting ill.
Yeah, I'm part of the risk group. So
Oop.
I was pretty much very affected by it. I had this feeling that every day I was reading that someone somewhere was writing to just let everyone in the risk group die, to reopen businesses, or so that people can go to the hairdresser or whatever, like the most random reasons to call for calling other people to let other people die. Yeah, random. And that kind of wore me down after a while because you read that every day there's something like that. And you start wondering, why should I care about these people if they don't care about me? So that I became very angry for a while, I suppose. And I didn't really know what to do with all that anger either. Like I don't make particularly angry music. Like, if I had a metal band, maybe I could do something with it, or a punk band, I don't know. But with an ambient project, what do you do? Chill yourself out with more mellow tracks. I don't know. chill hop for the apocalypse,
Yeah. I mean, sounds like a less stressful way to go under, but yeah, I mean, there is definitely some eerie like atmosphere around the music. Also in this album, and like what you made before was even a bit darker, right? Like what you mentioned.
Yeah. My second album, Hypnagogia, was even more, and that came out of not being very hopeful. It also ends on a darker note. Like it starts lighter and then goes into darkness, and it stays there because that's how I was feeling at the time. Yeah, that was very much a feeling of humanity is going in the wrong direction, and very fast at that too. So,
Yeah.
and in many ways that hasn't changed really.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask. Like, do you feel like that changed in like how you look against hope for humanity? Did that change with this album then? That because this sounds a bit more with a hopeful note at the end of some tracks and the album.
I also think that the album ends on a more hopeful note, and I guess it has something to do with not thinking in such a Western-centric way anymore, because we have this hubris that we have to be the ones to solve all these problems, right? We think it's probably this American Hollywood thing that people think in the West we're going to sort it out. The Americans are going to sort it out, right? That's what people think because they've seen so many movies where it is the case. But I don't really think so. Like I said, I don't think that anyone in the West has any interest in solving these problems. Whereas in other parts of the world, new forests get planted and the air quality is much better now because they put a lot of electric cars and made them affordable for people and so on and so forth. And yeah, not in the US or in the West in general, but in other
What
places.
areas are you seeing this out of interest?
In China specifically.
Hmm.
My husband was in China recently in Shanghai, and the air quality there was better than here. And we all tend to think of China as this very polluted place because it used to be like 15 years ago or so. They had a big problem with pollution, and they solved that problem, which is amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like that's a key like topic. I feel that's often overlooked, and that I feel personally like we drifted very far away from is like that humans see themselves as like at the top of the chain or the triangle or whatever, where we really completely like forgot to see also like the magic and like the how are the odds that we can have a talk like this? Yes, that's super special. Like we can realize that, but how do we find it so difficult to realize that we're literally just one tiny bit into a whole system? I think we're 0.01% of all living things on this earth. But still, if you see what impact we have on the other 99.9%, that's insane, I feel. And
Yeah.
I think a big part of that is that we just completely lost the realization that we're just a tiny bit, that we have the right to exist because other parts play their role. And we are just, one in a big system. And I think, yeah, that we forget that. I think that's like, yeah, quite an issue. I agree.
Yeah, definitely. I also, one thought that I always have is that if aliens actually came to this planet, I don't really think that they would realize that humans are the dominant species here.
Yeah.
They would probably think trees are
Yeah. Yeah.
more interesting. There's also this whole time frame
That's an
thing.
interesting thought. Yeah.
Because trees are slow, and who says that the aliens that are coming here are fast like us?
Yeah. It's all filled in with like a human point of view and a human perspective. And that's all then again shaped by cultures and dominant cultures and things like that, that also change over time, like how is the whole balance looking in 500 years, like, yeah, I think, I think it's the most cliche example, but I watched this documentary where they have this timeline from the start of the planet 4.5 billion years ago, and then every episode goes, I don't know, 200 million years in the future, and then you see how species evolve and stuff, and just the realization that dinosaurs walked around 65 million years or something, and then human beings walking up straight is what, 400,000 years or something like that. it's like not even a blink of an eye in time. And yeah, we build skyscrapers, but we're not gods. And I think that's like something we need to kind of, remember. Yeah. And I find it an interesting angle that you mentioned, like what would other species on this planet be interested in? Yeah, when they're visiting. Because I think mammals is 0.04% and then humans is 0.01, but all the rest is like fish, reptiles, plants,
Yeah,
fungi,
exactly.
all that. Yeah, interesting topic. But I'm also curious, how do you feel on a personal level that the pandemic then changed the relationship with your art now, looking back on it? Did you take something away from it creatively?
I think what I do has changed a lot through the pandemic. Before the pandemic, I used to shoot a lot of street photography. I was very
Mm.
interested in people and their behaviors and the oddities and their behaviors. And I have to say that I'm not that interested anymore. So I take a lot more pictures I take a lot more pictures of trees now, I think, than I used to. I spend more time in nature and away from people. Some of it was obviously a necessity because risk group, right? But I kind of embraced that, and I really enjoy landscape photography a lot more now. With the music, my music has definitely become darker through it, I suppose. I started out making very dark music. Originally, I was like full on dark ambient, but not lately. Like my background music was never dark ambient because you're gonna scare away the audience, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I sometimes did that, right? I got like comments where people said, "Oh, I feel like something dangerous gonna happen right now." So I don't always get that right when I'm making background music. I just drift too far into darkness, which is fun.
Happens. Yeah.
I guess that's one of the reasons why I held myself back from going too dark again for a while. And the pandemic just took out the stops because I didn't really need to worry about that anymore. I had people interested in just the music, not just the videos. So I was thinking much more of the music on its own and not just how it suits visuals or my footage or whatever. So I could go real dark, and I really enjoy that too. But I still try to not go too dark because it always reflects in a way in what mind space I am, and I would like to be in a positive mind space, right?
Yeah.
So
So you're balancing like expression with like how far it then carries on in your life.
yeah, I would like to be in a mood where I can make like a proper ambient album, like a proper happy ambient album. That would be, I would like to be in that mental space. Not sure whether I would actually enjoy the music so much if I did that. But I would enjoy the mental space, I think. I very much like ambient and I listen to very light ambient too. Like, for example, Jogging House. He has this very light, drifting feeling. His music always lifts me up and I really enjoy it. But in part, it's because I can't make that kind of music in a way. So I think that the music that goes in that direction that I would make wouldn't really be me anymore, I guess. I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah. There's a lot of what if, I think, behind that, right? Like, and
Yeah.
think, I think for me at least, if you try to create something with a too much of a forcing into this is what I want to put out, and at least I experienced that in the past, and I dropped the project because I lose my joy in that project. Then yeah,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I always let my music go where it wants to go, for better or worse. So if it gets super dark, then it just gets super dark, and I just accept that. And then I have to, you know, make a proper dark album at some point because I
yeah.
have many such dark tracks by now.
Who knows? Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe there's very hopeful stuff happening in the next year or 2 years in the world, and then
Ooh.
you might create something super light.
Yes. Yes. Although I have to say that I'm not very optimistic in that regard. With what's currently going on, it's hard to imagine that it's going to get so much better in the next year or two. I don't know. I don't know how you feel about that. Where I'm completely on my own with this kind of doom
No,
feeling sometimes. I don't know.
no, not really, I think. I think I do feel somewhat hopeful, but that might be very, of course, I'm saying everything from my personal experiences and point of view at this moment in life, but I do feel like I speak more people, or I talk to more people that also have the idea like certain things are more important, like that are seeing like, this can't go on forever, like the systems that we're living in. But then, of course, the big question is it like better than what comes after or not? And then again, it's like, that's from a human perspective. Like, is it going to be better for humans or not? I think whatever happens also to the human species is literally evolution of how we as a species apparently, we're in this system. And if this system treats us with a certain, how do you say it? If we get certain effects from the system because of our behavior, then that's also nature, is a way to look at it. But yeah, I don't find that very hopeful for me per se, or for like human beings. But am quite hopeful when it comes to people like thinking there should be other ways. And I also see like people, when it comes to work, for example, that we found it very normal to work full weeks for basically getting 2 days off in a weekend and 2 weeks of holiday a year, that a lot of people found that normal, and that more and more people are like, yeah, but this is weird. Like, if you look back on how, species live on this planet, then this is not normal to do it this way. And where did we lose that in like the past 100 years? But yeah, on the other hand, how are systems and people that were used to certain systems going to react if that all of a sudden changes? Yeah, that's also interesting, especially since like at this moment, money seems to be like the great thing for influence and power. And yeah, if a lot of people refuse to keep those systems up, what happens then with those systems? Or yeah, a lot of questions. I don't know if that's hopeful, but yeah.
One thought that makes me hopeful is actually that capitalism is a very young system. If you think of Mark Fisher and his writing, he writes that we can sooner imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. Which is funny because capitalism hasn't been around that long. It's not that old of a system. And before, there was no such thing, and people lived entirely differently. And it wasn't also the system where we work 5 days a week and get only two weeks off. This didn't used to be the case. People used to live with the seasons because they couldn't do their harvest in the middle of winter. Just nature didn't comply, so they had to take a rest. And it was normal to work only in the spring and summer and autumn and not in winter. So who says that this system is going to persist? I don't really think it can persist because it's just too destructive and too exploitative. Yeah, it just destroys the environment to such an extent that it's not sustainable and it can't go on forever. It's just a simple matter of fact that capitalism is not sustainable in the long run. It will just destroy itself sooner or later. That's my hopeful feeling.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I agree. That also makes me a bit hopeful. And I also see that more and more with like my generation and also younger people, that like, I feel there's two sides. Again, I'm very aware that I might be, having my bubble and stuff, but I feel like I'm moving away from it more and more. And I see more people in my environment that have that as well, that are like, everything is developing so quick and unnaturally. Like, our brains are not made to up this amount of percentages in speed of calculation and memory and all those context switching so quickly in this amount of time. So it doesn't work. And for me, it feels like I want to move away from screens more. I'm literally considering changing career to something hands-on outside, because I'm done with like the screens and being in meetings discussing, for me now, feeling very irrelevant numbers and having the feeling that I need to tell something that sounds important so that people keep paying me so that I can keep living, paying my bills. It just feels weird and not right. And yeah, I think that comes with a lot of confusion and challenge, and like how do we deal with it then? But I that makes me hopeful to see, and that's not only me but also other people that I talk with as well. Maybe if enough people are hopeful, then that could shift.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the pandemic changed a lot of people's minds in the respect that suddenly a lot of people weren't feeling useful anymore, and their jobs didn't really have the same meaning as before. And you see that a lot in the gastronomy business. People who used to work as servers in restaurants don't want to do the job anymore and so on, because it's just such a stressful job and so on. So if you think about what's really relevant, what's really important and in your life and how you want to spend your life, a lot of people have realized that what we were doing before the pandemic was not really the right thing to do. And I see a lot of that where people have changed jobs or completely turned their lives upside down through
Yeah.
what happened.
Did it change a lot for you personally, like the pandemic, and how you look on what things are important in life, like outside of the creative realm, but more like how you look on life and what you find important and maybe what you photograph and stuff like that?
What I photograph has definitely
Yeah.
changed. But I was already not in this grind that most people experience with capitalism anyway. I was already doing already doing creative stuff before, so it didn't really feel like much changed. And I have to say that for a little moment at the beginning of the pandemic, I actually had more social contact than before the pandemic, if that makes sense. Not in person, obviously, but since I live abroad and away from a lot of my friends, there were these moments where they weren't so tech savvy that they would know how to use video chat or whatever. And I wouldn't have that much contact with them. And suddenly everyone knew how to use video chat and so on. I suddenly had I was playing games with friends and online games, and they wouldn't have had the time before. And for a little while, I actually felt like I had more of a social life than before because I live abroad and in this place, the people are kind of closed and it's very hard to make friends. And so
Mm,
I don't really have many friends here. And I
mm.
spend a lot of my time just on my own taking pictures. So it just, the 3D relationships, those kind of suffered.
Yeah. But I recognize what you say, that it did that. Like the beginning of the pandemic, I felt like first there was the hoarding toilet paper and things like that, because that's the problems we can imagine. But then there was this period of like people were scared because the scale seemed so huge and there were all these images of people walking in white suits, and all of a sudden it seemed like people were like, oh, I need to stay in contact with the people I care about because this can be really, I don't know, dangerous, big, whatever. And then it lasted for a while. At least that was the case here in the Netherlands. And then you saw like more and more protests, and people started missing their relevant or irrelevant things in life. And then, there was more and more polarization, I feel, with like two sides almost that shaped a bit in the whole discussion, that it almost became, at least here, like not nice to talk to people about the topic because it could go two ways or something. A bit weird how that developed here, I feel.
Yeah, I felt it was the same here and in Germany too. And there was a lot of talk about freedom, but it was this weird individualistic sense of freedom. I mean, freedom ends where you hurt other people, right? Normally.
Yeah.
With normal people, it ends there.
Yeah.
But in this case, it didn't end there, and it was just me and my needs, and people were prioritizing that and didn't really think that far ahead. And that was completely different in other countries. We happened
Yeah.
to watch a lot of a channel, a YouTube channel in China called Javierzo. There's a Spanish guy who is married to a Chinese woman, and they were in Wuhan when it started. So we followed it from the beginning, and we knew that it was happening before people in the West even realized that it was happening. And there it was they had a completely different attitude towards it. They had this zero COVID restrictions where they really clamped down on everything, and they managed to keep the numbers really far down, and it showed what would have been possible if they hadn't prioritized profit in the West. And it's, yeah, that really was eye-opening in the sense that it was such a different way of dealing with it. And in the West, it seemed more like everyone was prioritizing their individual freedoms over everyone else's needs and so on. I found that very alienating, also because I heard things like that, the calls for letting people die to reopen businesses. I heard that not just from people who you'd think, oh yeah, you would expect them to talk like that. No, I heard that from friends. And then I say things like, I'm risk group, right? What you're saying is kind of crazy, And they would just not make the connection of that this is happening to real people in some way. And yeah, it was very disconcerting because it made such a big difference in how I related to certain people who were just inconsiderate in that sense. I don't know.
Yeah, so it also learned you something in that way, kind of.
Yeah, that's probably why I said earlier that I felt a bit naive before the pandemic. I didn't see that part coming, that I would have to argue with friends over that. I mean, you would expect that at least your friends wouldn't want to let you die, And yeah, of course, not friends anymore, obviously.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit about magic still. Maybe that's a nice chance to move away from the doom of pandemic.
yeah,
Because
definitely. Let's
you've
get away from that.
yeah, I found it really fun because you've mentioned quite some like little magic happenings and accidents that happened around the album, like the rabbit's eye being a leaf actually perfectly placed, and the tape being the same length on two sides, and maybe in the first place, like finding these forgotten tapes was already like somewhat of a magic moment. Do you feel those things like fuel your creativity? And if so, does that happen a lot to you, that those little happy accidents happen?
Oh yeah, serendipity like that happens to me all the time, and it's kind of freaky sometimes. The rabbit, completely unplanned, was not expecting the rabbit at all, and then I take the pictures, and then I zoom in, and the eye is the leaf, and I'm like, what? That's just such a perfect thing, completely
Yeah.
unplanned, obviously. And yeah, I think serendipity like this is something where I feel the universe nods at me that I'm doing something right here. I'm on the right track. The universe approves. Keep going. So I lean into that a lot. If I feel like there's a lot of favorable things going on, I continue with a project. And sometimes I also have the opposite, where the universe is resisting and I should do something else right now. I had this one album I was working on where I was in the middle of recording it, and in the middle of it, my SD card died and corrupted like all the video recordings I had made at the same time. And I spent like hours trying to restore all the video files, and I was like, oh God, it's so terrible. And in the end, I decided to postpone the recording because, okay, universe is trying to tell me something here. Maybe I should focus on something else right now so that I don't have to go through this again. It sometimes feels like, even though I don't believe in God, and I don't feel like there is some power that has some sort of say over everything. I don't believe in that. Sometimes it feels like the universe rhymes in a way. And you can go with the flow, and usually it comes from somewhere, also from us, obviously. Sometimes we resist things and then we sabotage ourselves and then they don't work. And sometimes we're just in the groove where everything flows and we can create more freely. And I try to embrace that flow, to get into that flow where everything just works smoothly and seamlessly, and I don't have to struggle against everything. And struggling against the difficulties is always, sometimes I just don't do it because it feels like maybe I'm not ready for it right now.
Is that something you had to learn, so to say, to spot these, like, call it omens or like these flows and not flows?
Oh yeah, definitely. I used to struggle against that a lot. Like as a street photographer, I used to live in Berlin, and that's obviously a great city for street photography because it's big, lots of people, and you can explore a different neighborhood every single day of the weekend. It never gets boring. Whereas here, I sometimes feel like I've photographed everything and everyone 3 times over. And when I start recognizing the people in my pictures because I've taken pictures of them before, like a year ago or something, then I feel like, oh, I'm getting bored here. Then this used to frustrate me a lot, and then I would struggle against it and shoot anyway, even though I was feeling demotivated and so on. But now I don't do that anymore. If I feel like there is some sort of resistance, I just stop and do something else for a while. And if I maybe in a year I feel like taking a different picture of the same tree again, but maybe not right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of you can overthink a lot, right? Like, well, it's like theoretically it's quite easy. Does something feel good? Do it. Does something not feel good? Don't do it. But there's so much around it that can make it difficult, I feel, right?
Yeah, also of course you shouldn't always do that. I mean,
Mm,
then you would avoid all the difficult topics and all the difficult subjects and all the difficult projects.
yeah.
Like my modular album that was giving me so much trouble. I never would have finished that if I didn't sometimes push against the difficult bits. I like difficult projects too, but if you do that the whole time, then your creative experience becomes very frustrating and it becomes way too, I call it outcome focused. Like when you're more involved in the pictures that you're taking or the music that you're making or whatever it is that you're making, rather than enjoying the process of making them, of taking the pictures, of making the music. I mean, if you don't enjoy making the music, then why the hell do we do it, right?
Yeah.
What's the point?
Yeah.
Same goes for photography and so on in any creative pursuit. If you don't enjoy it, then don't do it, I would say.
So that's how you would differentiate, basically, like something can be hard or not working with you, but you still feel that you have joy in it or that you want to do it, or how do you
Yeah.
differentiate? Yeah.
It's like sometimes something is difficult because it's interesting. And that makes
Mm.
it interesting too. Like we don't always want to take, I mean, it's easy to take nice pictures of pretty girls in wheat fields, right?
Mm.
That's super easy. Don't even have to make an effort for that. It's much harder to take interesting pictures in mundane surroundings. If you manage to do that
Mm.
anyway, that's really challenging and more interesting than taking the 100th picture of a pretty girl. I don't know. Even though,
Mm.
taking pictures of pretty girls is also fun.
Yeah. Let it both be there in their own
Yeah.
space. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like with I don't know, eating cake all the time. You
Yeah.
can sometimes you need something more substantial, I suppose.
Cake on its own is still nice, but yeah, you want to switch it around. And about Polarcoaster, what is coming next? Like you already mentioned, your album, your long-awaited modular synth album is done. So I guess that's coming at some
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, that's coming definitely. I just need to mix and master it and well, mastering. In this case, Dreams Long Forgotten, Alberto from El Manto mastered it. I say
Mm.
mastering, I only mean pre-mastering. And yeah, with Hypnagogia, I did it myself, but I'm not a mastering engineer. I just do my best and hope
Mm.
for the best.
Yeah. So it depends a bit if you get it on a label or something, how that's gonna look, that process, or.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes I do it myself and I know a little bit about it and I think I did an okay job with Hypnagogia. But Alberto really put a lot of good work into Dreams Long Forgotten and I'm very grateful for it because it turned out really great. And yeah, but for the modular album I still have to go through the mixing stage and that's also a long stage for me usually because ambient gets difficult to mix with all the big washes of reverb. It makes it difficult to place all the elements. So mixing actually is a difficult part of the process, and I always procrastinate on it. But that comes next.
Cool. Yeah. And are you like really feeling that music is the focus for the next while, or are your other projects also still ongoing or just as it comes?
It's actually ongoing. I've been taking a lot of pictures lately too for one of my projects. I take a lot of pictures with one of my cameras has like a flipped lens on it, and I use plastic cameras too. And I have a project with that. And the album cover of Hypnagogia was taken with that sort of camera, for example. And I'm still working on that project. I've been doing that for quite a few years, and I've taken more pictures on that recently too, after a break. So there's also that happening.
Yeah. I was already gonna say you're probably not sitting still or being bored. Like as we started with, you're doing a lot and there's constantly stuff happening, I feel. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. I also have lots of videos planned, and
yeah, no reason to get bored. I was gonna say, like at the end of the episode, after we say goodbye, I'd still like to play Maria's Vivas, also because there is the birds being present there that you mentioned that you recorded in a local bird sanctuary, right?
yes.
And you also have the story about the sea creature in your album. And yeah, I mean, it's quite obvious that nature is a part of your production, so to say. It's quite obvious. But I was wondering, how would you say it connects? Is it in all your work, or is it in this album that it kind of happened, that it evolved that way?
It's in all my work, I would say.
Mm.
Because Hypnagogia, I also thought of it as like a walk in the forest. You go into a forest, into a strange forest, and it gets very dark and eerie and spooky, and you find some weird creatures that shouldn't be there. That sort of thing. that kind of thing.
I like walking in the forest, so I'm not sure if I should listen to it.
Well, it gets quite dark, that one, at some point. But there are also lighter moments, and for example, that one also has bird sounds on it. So I think it's a theme with me, and I always take pictures of landscapes, and I end up with lots of field recordings from my GoPro too, and nature definitely plays a big role in my work.
Yeah. I already thought that's why you're here, I guess. Yeah, it's cool to hear and see though how that works for you and find its place. I'd actually like to close off the talk with one reflection and one tip, and you can pick which you want to start with.
One reflection and one tip. In which direction?
One is a tip that you want to share with our listeners, and the other is a reflection about what then you know it already. Let's go with a reflection. You have a great video about how you made the album, basically. And how it came together. But I'm curious, if there's one thing that you really took away from this album, what did it teach you, basically?
The power of limitations, definitely. Because before I was maybe doing it subconsciously, maybe, because I didn't have that much gear or didn't use that much gear. But I've accumulated a lot of stuff. So now it's not so easy anymore to limit myself just by not having stuff. So now I have to do it more consciously, and it really helps to focus projects. I just wasn't really aware that I was doing it before. And this one really came together so well because I was limiting myself. Yeah.
Cool that it ripples on in your other work and life. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, and for a tip, I'm curious if you have one tip that you can share with anyone listening that anyone or almost everyone can use to live a bit more consciously, not further degrade our planet, or maybe reduce their footprint a little bit. Yeah, what would that be if you have to share one thing?
Oh, that's actually a really big can of worms.
Well, do we have another hour? Let's go.
Yeah.
We can do a part 2.
I personally think that we have been fooled into thinking that we have to reduce our footprint when it's really the big corporations that make up most of the pollution on this planet. We're not the one deep sea drilling. I mean, seriously, we're not. We can try to reduce our footprint as much as we want, as long as these companies keep polluting our planet. So what we really need to do is not reduce our footprint, but go protest. That's my tip. Go protest if you want to reduce your footprint.
Yeah, I think protesting, and then on top of that, maybe in the same line, like you have a lot of petitions and online like places where you can like leave your vote, right? If the European Union is voting about a topic, that you can like let your voice be heard online as well for petitions and stuff. Yeah.
It's one form of protest. definitely.
right. Yeah. Good
Yeah.
one. I don't think I heard that before, but I think I agree very much on, yeah, it's definitely like we can all do our little bits, but that's not where we're gonna fix the issue for sure.
Yeah. Because they're always gonna find a new way of making things worse as long as it makes profit. So that's what we need to focus on. And our own footprint is great and all. It helps, but the main pollutions still comes from companies, and that's what we need to address, I think.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. Cool. Yeah, I'm gonna wrap it up. So for everyone listening, thanks so much for joining this conversation with Lilly. You can find links to her music and her other art, and yeah, all channels also to support her work in the show notes or in the description wherever you're listening or watching. And if you want to support us with our mission to heal the earth with art, then I'd love to invite you to heal the earth with us for free. It's as simple as hitting that subscribe or follow button wherever you're listening or watching, and we will help restore 1 square meter of ecosystem where it's needed the most in your name. It's only 1 or 2 clicks, it's completely free for you, and you're genuinely healing the earth that way. And it would also massively help if you could like the episode or leave a comment if you're watching on YouTube, or give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform. I promise I'll reply to every single comment, and it massively helps us to spread our earth healing message. And it also keeps us and the artists motivated. Yeah, and then Lilly, thank you so much also for taking the time to sit down with me and to share so openly about also your work, but also like how that affected you personally. And yeah, I feel like you really openly shared. So thanks so much for that. Yeah,
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
thank you. I agree. And then, yeah, we're going to listen to Maria's Vivas still. So don't go yet, but thanks for watching. This is Maria's Vivas.